All right, this is Math 103, 5.3 continued. We're going to be adding and subtracting fractions. So the first ones that we're going to do is we're going to add with like denominators. And so when we add fractions, you always have to have your pie cut into the same size pieces, okay? So in these cases, when I have eighths, I'm going to write the denominator one time, and then I'm going to add the numerators. And so that gives me 4/8, which then I always check to make sure it is simplified. And so dividing the top and the bottom by 4, my simplified answer is 1/2. Okay, if it is a subtraction problem, you still write the denominator one time and take 19 minus 5, and you will get 14. And then I will have to divide both of these by 2 so that I will get 7/12, okay? Now, with unlike denominators, you must get a common denominator. So what we're doing is we are creating equal fractions. So let me show you. If I have a pie and I cut it in half, and I tell you that I ate half of this pie, okay? So I'm going to just say that that's 1/2. But then I could cut it again, and that's equal to now 2/4 are shaded. And then I could cut it again and again, and that's equal to 4/8, etc. Okay, so I haven't changed how much I've eaten. I'm just writing it in a different way. And so that's what we're doing. We're writing these fractions in different ways. And so when you find a common denominator, usually we use the least common denominator. But sometimes if we can't find the least common denominator, we can multiply those denominators together to find a common. So when I look at this first problem, I'm going to ask you what is the smallest number that both 5 and 3 divide into? And so hopefully you will know that that's 15. If I counted by 5s, 5, 10, 15, 20, etc. If I counted by 3s, 3, 6, 9, 12, whoops, missed one, the important one, 12, 15, 18, etc., then you can see that the smallest number that they have in common is 15. So I want to change both of those fractions into 15ths. And that means what I'm going to do is I'm going to multiply 5 by a number so that it gets turned into a 15. But I have to keep it balanced, and so I have to multiply the top by that same number. So I'm going to multiply 2/5 by 3/3. And so that gives me 3 times 2 is 6, and 3 times 5 is 15. And then here's what the question I get from students is well, so should I reduce it? Well, no, because if you reduce it, you're right back to where you started, and you can't add those fractions. So the reducing does not come until the end, okay? Now I move to the next fraction. I say 1/3. I want to change that 3 into a 15, which means I have to multiply the top and bottom by 5. And so what I'm doing is 5/5 is 1. 3/3 is 1. So I'm just simply multiplying those fractions by 1 and writing them in a different format. So now I've got 1 times 5 is 5. 3 times 5 is 15. And now I'm ready to add. Write the denominator and add 6 plus 5. And so 2/5 plus 1/3 is equal to 11/15, okay? Now this next one, if I find the smallest number that 6 divides evenly into and 4 divides evenly into, the most common wrong answer is somebody's going to say 2. Well, 6 does not divide into 2. 2 divides into 6. So what you can do is, again, think of counting by sixes. 6, 12, 18, 24, 30, etc. Then count by fours. 4, 8, 12, 16, 20, 24, etc. So the smallest number that they have in common is 12. However, you could use 24, okay? But I'm going to use the smaller number. So I say to myself, okay, how can I turn 6 into 12? Well, I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 2. So that gives me 10 twelfths. How can I change 4 into 12? I'm going to multiply top and bottom by 3. So that gives me 9 twelfths. Now I write the denominator. 10 minus 9 is 1, and I can't simplify, okay? So the next one, they get a little bit harder. And again, a lot of times you will have numbers that all you can do to find the common denominator is take 8 times 3. So my common denominator, or my LCD for this next problem, is 24. So I'm going to multiply top and bottom of the first fraction by 3 over 3. I'm going to multiply the top and bottom of the second fraction by 8 over 8. And so this becomes 15 24ths, and this becomes 8 24ths, and then I write 24 and add 15 plus 8, and that gives me 23. All right, the last one, save yourself some work. The least common denominator is 12. Yes, you could use 24, you could use 36, but that's just going to cause you more work. So I'm going to turn 3 into a 12 by multiplying top and bottom by 4. So that gives me 28 twelfths. The second fraction is already in twelfths, so I don't have to multiply it by anything. Write your denominator one time, and 28 minus 5 is 23. And then I would just leave it like that. Unless it specifically asks you to turn it to a mixed number, I would just leave it like that. Now, these next ones are a little bit more challenging. So I'm going to come down here and I'm going to actually count by numbers. What I suggest you do is, you could count by 72s. You could count by 48s. You could count by 12. So I'm going to just kind of do that. 72. And 72 times 2 is 144. And 72 times 3 is 216, etc. If I count by 48s, I get 48 times 2 would be 96, plus times 48 times 3 is 144. Ooh, I'm going to stop because I think I know that the number is going to be 144. 12, 24, 36, 48, etc., and 144. So my least common denominator is going to be 144. So I have to turn all 3 of these fractions into 144s. So hopefully you know that 12 times 12 is 144. 48 times 3 is 144. And 72 times 2 is 144. So now we get 12 144ths plus 3 144ths plus 2 144ths we write our common denominator, and then we add 12 plus 3 is 15 plus 2 is 17. Okay, so those are a little bit challenging. The next one, hopefully when you look at that, those denominators don't have as much work to do, because if you think of like money, or, 25, 50, 75, 100, 125, etc. So you can kind of go through those numbers, 100, 200, 300, 400, etc. And then 40 is a little bit more challenging because it's going to be 40, 80, 120, 160, 200. So in this case, my LCD is going to be 200, okay? So if I take 25 and multiply that by 8, that gives me 200. If I take 100 and multiply that by 2, that gives me 200. And then if I take 40 and multiply by 5, that gives me 200. And so now I'm going to have these numbers. 8 times 4 is 32, and 8 times 25 does give me 200, minus 9 times 2 is 18, 100 times 2 is 200, minus 7 times 5 is 35, and 40 times 5 is 200. So now we write the denominator, that's the same, and then I'm just going to punch this into my calculator. 32 minus 18 minus 35 gives me negative 21. And that would be my answer. So those problems are a little bit of a challenge. Finding the common denominator is going to be the hard part. But then we're going to be able to combine some operations before we get into some application problems. So the only thing that you have to remember, please excuse my dear Aunt Sally. Remember that when you add and subtract, you need common denominators. Okay. When you multiply and divide, you do not, but you have to make sure that if you're dividing, you keep, change, and flip. So we're going to approach these by looking at this right here. Multiplication comes before addition, so I am going to multiply. And if I can, guys, I want to make sure that I can reduce to make it in the smallest number. So 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 6. So 1 times 2 is 2, 1 times 7 is 7. So that replaces the multiplication. And then I'm going to bring down the 1/4. So now I'm adding, and I must get a common denominator, which my LCD is going to be 28. So I multiply 7 by 7 to the 1/4, and 4 over 4 to the 2/7. So now I get 7 28ths plus 8 28ths, and that equals 15 28ths. Okay? All right, the next one, we have division, but remember division, we keep the first fraction, we change to multiplication, we flip the second fraction over. So 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 6, so that leaves me with 5 times 1 over 2 times 2. And then I bring down the 4 9ths. So I'm going to come up here so we have a little bit more room. 4 9ths plus 5 4s. Your common denominator is going to be 36. So I'm going to multiply by 4 over 4 and 9 over 9. So 16 36 plus 45 36 equals, 36 goes on the bottom, and 16 plus 45 gives me 61. Okay? All right, the next one. As I read it left to right, division comes first. Okay? So 7/8, change to multiplication, flip that second fraction over. Look for ways to simplify. 4 goes into 4 once, 4 goes into 8 twice. So that becomes 7/6, and then I bring down the 3/16. Again, I'm going to simplify. 3 goes into 3, 3 goes into 6, 7 times 1 is 7, and 2 times 16 is 32. Okay? The next one is exactly the same thing, except two things change. The numbers, obviously, and then we have a negative sign. So I'm going to write this as -8/15. Change the division to multiplication. Flip the second fraction over. 3 goes into 3 once. 3 goes into 15 5 times. 2 goes into 2 once. 2 goes into -8 4 times. So now I have -4 over 5, and bring down the 7/9. -4 times 7 is -28. 5 times 9 is 45. And that's it. We've got 2 more before we get to the application problems. So in this next one, I've got to treat each one of these multiplications first, even though they're not in parentheses, and then I'm going to do the addition. So looking for things that'll cancel, this 3 cancels this 3, and 1 times 1 is 1, and 1 times 7 is 7. This 5 goes into this 10, and that leaves me 3 times 2 is 6, and 1 times 11 is 11. So my common denominator is going to be 77. So I'm going to multiply by 11/11 and 7/7. So I get 11/77 plus 42/77. And that gives me the denominator of 77, and 42 plus 11 is 53. Now, you will see this one in your homework. And so what I recommend you do is that if you see a whole number, let's write it as a fraction, okay? So those are in parentheses, so you've got to get a common denominator in the first group, and the denominators are a 1 and a 9. So that means that you're going to multiply this by 9/9, so that you get 27/9 minus 4/9 in that first parentheses. So that gives me 23/9. Then I've got to multiply this fraction by 3/3. So that gives me 12/3 plus 2/3, which is 14 thirds, not 13th, sorry, 14 thirds. That relieves the parentheses, but now you've got a division sign in between them. So we keep the first fraction, change to multiplication, and flip the second fraction over. And so this 3 goes into 3 once, and 3 goes into 9 3 times. So 23 times 1 is 23, and 3 times 14 is going to be 42. And that finishes up the multiple applications. Then I will start with the word problems. So we're going to end there.